He was just a boy, torn from his home, stripped of his name, thrown into the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. They wanted to make him forget who he was, forget his God, forget everything. But Daniel had already decided something deep in his heart, in a place no king could reach. He would not bow. This it is the book of Daniel, chapter 1. It began with fire. In the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign over Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came. He laid siege to Jerusalem, and God permitted it. The great walls that had stood for generations crumbled. The sacred vessels from the temple of the Lord were taken, carried off to Babylon like trophies. Israel's glory in the hands of a pagan king. But Nebuchadnezzar did not just want land. He wanted mines. He gave a command to Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials. "Bring me the best of Israel," the king said. "Young men with no defect, handsome, intelligent, quick to learn. Teach them the language of Babylon. Feed them from the king's own table. In 3 years, they will stand before me." The plan was brilliant and terrifying. He was not just conquering a nation, he was replacing it. Among the young men chosen were 4: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. They were from Judah, royalty possibly, bright, disciplined, strong. They were exactly what Nebuchadnezzar wanted. But the Babylonians did something calculated. They gave these 4 boys new names. Daniel became Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, Azariah became Abednego. New names, new language, new food, new world. The empire wanted to erase everything that made them who they were. The king's food was the finest in the world. Rich meats, royal wine, delicacies from across the empire. To most it would have seemed like a gift. But to Daniel it was a trap. The food had been offered to Babylonian idols. Eating it would mean participating in worship that belonged to God alone. And the wine, Daniel knew what it could do to a man's convictions over time. So quietly, deliberately, Daniel made a decision. He would not eat from the king's table. Daniel went to Ashpenaz, the official in charge of them. He did not demand, he did not argue. He asked. "Please," Daniel said, "test your servants for 10 days. Give us only vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare us to the young men who eat the king's food." It was a bold request. If this went wrong, both Daniel and Ashpenaz could face consequences. But Ashpenaz had grown fond of Daniel, and so he agreed. 10 days. The 10 days began. While others feasted on the king's rich food and wine, Daniel and his 3 friends ate only vegetables. Lentils, beans, simple bread, water. No royal flavors, no celebrations. Just faith and discipline, day after day. Some might have wondered, was this enough? Would God show up? Would they be weaker? Would they fall behind? But Daniel did not wonder. He had made his decision, and now he waited for God to honor it. 10 days passed. Ashpenaz looked at them. He compared them to every other young man who had eaten from the king's table, and what he saw stopped him. Daniel and his friends looked healthier, stronger. Their faces were fuller and more vibrant than all the others. Not because of the vegetables, because God had honored their faithfulness. From that day forward, Ashpenaz gave all 4 boys vegetables, just as Daniel had asked. God had shown up on day 10. But God was not finished. The Bible says that God gave these 4 young men something that food could never give: knowledge, understanding, wisdom in every branch of learning and literature. And to Daniel specifically, God gave something more: the ability to understand visions and dreams of all kinds, a gift that would one day shake the most powerful kings on earth. But for now, they were still students, still learning, still being prepared. 3 years passed. 3 years of study, 3 years of discipline, 3 years in the belly of the greatest empire on earth. But Daniel never forgot who he was. Every morning was a choice: to remember God, to stay grounded, to keep his heart clean in a place designed to corrupt it. The Babylonians had given him a new name, but they could never touch his soul. Some things a king cannot take. At the end of 3 years, the king himself called for them. Nebuchadnezzar sat on his great throne. One by one, the young men stood before him. The king questioned them. He tested their wisdom. their understanding, their ability to reason and respond. And in all matters, in every question the king asked, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were found to be 10 times better, 10 times better than all the magicians and wise men in the entire kingdom, 10 times. Nebuchadnezzar was impressed, more than impressed. He placed Daniel and his 3 friends in permanent service at the royal palace, former captives, boys who had been torn from their homes, now standing in the halls of the greatest empire in the world, not because they compromised, not because they bowed, but because they stayed faithful, and God had elevated them from the inside out. Understand what Babylon was. It was the New York City of the ancient world, the Rome before Rome. Its hanging gardens were one of the wonders of the world. Its walls were so wide that chariots could race across the top. It was a city built to make men forget God, built on power, on pleasure, on pride, and right in the center of it, 4 young men who chose to remember. That contrast is the miracle, not fire, not a lion's den, not yet, just 4 boys, choosing God, quietly, daily, faithfully. It is easy to read this story and think it was simple. It was not. Every day in Babylon was a test. Every meal was a reminder of who they were not supposed to be anymore. Every lesson in Babylonian astrology and sorcery was a challenge to their beliefs. They had to learn it, but not become it. They had to live inside the empire without letting the empire live inside them. That is not easy for an adult. These were teenagers. The book of Daniel tells us something at the end of this chapter that most people read past. Daniel continued, it says, until the 1st year of King Cyrus. Do you understand what that means? Daniel arrived in Babylon as a young teenager, around 605 BC. Cyrus the Great came to power in 539 BC. That is over 60 years. Daniel remained faithful for over 60 years in the land of captivity. Not a moment of compromise in the record, not one. Here is what Daniel chapter 1 is really teaching us. The battles that determine your destiny are not always loud. They are not always dramatic. Sometimes the most important fight of your life is the quiet one, the one where no one is watching. Where you simply decide, will I compromise today, or will I hold the line? Daniel did not defeat a lion in chapter 1. He declined a meal, and that decision shaped everything that came after. Nebuchadnezzar's empire was the most powerful the world had known, but Babylon fell. Every empire falls. The Persians came, then the Greeks, then the Romans. Every kingdom built by human hands eventually crumbles. But Daniel's God, the one Daniel refused to abandon in chapter 1, is still worshipped today, thousands of years later. Billions of people still call on his name. The empire that tried to erase Daniel is dust, and Daniel's story is still being told. Maybe you are young. Maybe you are in a place right now that feels like Babylon, a school, a workplace, a family situation where everything around you is pulling you away from who God made you to be, where fitting in feels easier than standing firm. Where the king's table looks very, very good, Daniel's message to you today is simple. You do not have to compromise to succeed. You do not have to lose yourself to survive. God can elevate you exactly as you are. This is what God proved in Daniel chapter 1. He sees the small decisions, the quiet choices, the private moments of faithfulness when no one is applauding. He honors them. He elevated Daniel from captive to counselor, from prisoner to palace, not because Daniel was perfect, but because Daniel was purposeful. He made up his mind, and God met him there. He will meet you there too. Daniel, chapter 1. A boy who refused to let an empire define him. A boy who believed that faithfulness in the small things would lead to greatness in the great things. He was right. This is only the beginning of his story. In the chapters ahead, a furnace of fire, a den of lions, dreams that would shake the nations, visions of the end of the world itself. But it all started here, with a meal he refused to eat, with a God he refused to forget. If you're watching this today, remember Daniel. Make up your mind and do not bow.